going to run into a lot of trial and error too. You really, really need to have determination to get through this, something new like this. Because there's trial and error, and error, and error, and lots and lots of errors after that. But you got to be willing to get through those errors, because it's totally worth it in the end. It really is. This would be the most spoken, what would you say is the most spoken phrase in our team, Russell?
I'd have to say that it was, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm sure as hell going to try it anyway.
I'm going to take over and talk about the programming aspect of it.
Well, one of the things that we've been working on is integrating it into UDK, because that's what we're making our game in. And in this kind of untested area, we're on the bleeding edge. Nobody's done this before. Nobody is there. And it's really cool to work with this technology. That's what the bleeding edge is. It's really cool technology, but you have no idea how to work it, no idea how to use it, and no idea how to get it to do what you want it to do. And that's where you run into the problem where there's no documentation. Nobody's done this before, so you have no idea. There's no precedent. There's no documentation anywhere out there. You're just trying to make the engine do what you want, what it's not capable of doing to begin with, which is what the engine says. The engine, like I can recall multiple times where we were trying to get the motion control working, and the data values we were pulling out were completely different from what we were seeing on the screen. For instance, we were trying to get the guns to move along with the rotation, and the guns would move off to the corner of the screen, but all it was affecting was the rotation. It wasn't actually affecting the positional value. Yet on the screen it looks like it was. So the data values we were seeing and what was actually happening were two different things. Which is why you need to think different. You need to think outside the box. You need to take different approaches. But thinking different, and actually when you think different, you end up having things that just end up working magically. It's a lot of things that you're doing. It ends up, I can recall a couple of times where I was working on a specific piece of code, and I was sitting there, and it wasn't working. It just wasn't working at all. So I'd move on to another feature set. Because I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to stress about a specific feature if I can't get it implemented. I can always come back to it later. And then I start working on this other feature set, and boom, I build the code, and the first feature starts working. But along with that, when things magically work, things can also magically break. And there's been multiple times where I've been sitting there and I end up coding something, and it just breaks something that has nothing to do with what I was just coding. It just happens. Because you're on that bleeding edge. You've never actually tried this before. Nobody's done this.
You've got no one to go to when that happens. We are the go-to guys.
And then you end up going to what is next. If this is where we are right now, where we're on the bleeding edge, where are we going next? How can we make it so that the developers, and how can all the developers out there, all of us, use this technology and use it well?
Like you said, the biggest thing is, with all these scary challenges going on, what about the future? Why is it going to be worth it? I see a lot of people on blogs, websites, you name it, arguing and kind of debating about, which gimmick is going to survive this generation, motion control or stereoscopic 3D gaming. And personally, I think motion control and 3D should get married and have babies, because especially now with stuff like the Hydra and the Move out there, you've got pretty much three-dimensionally aware motion control. And if we have a three-dimensionally aware motion control combined with three-dimensional visuals, can you imagine the depth that your brain and the depth of the immersion? Your brain, you can reach into a world where you're actually seeing things pop out at you. When you have this three-dimensional input combined with that visual stimuli, you're talking about a whole new level of immersion there. You're talking about really, really feeling like you're in the game, and I think that's what motion control is all about. And this is where you want to get into complex gesture systems that are required for such things.
So one of the things that's going to be happening in the future of motion control and gaming is that we're no longer going to have very simple gestures like there is now, which is kind of, okay, I lift the controller up and I jump. That's about it. Yeah, exactly. I flick it down and it makes me duck. And that's the limit of where we're at now. Complex gesture systems is where it's going to go in the future. We're going to start playing games like, let's just say a Harry Potter game, or any other magic-based game where you can actually take the controller and in a swift movement, like this, and it casts a spell. Or you're going to have swords on the screen that actually represent where you're swinging, jabs, and the swings, and fully one-to-one controlling it. And that's where we're going to hit next, is this complex gesture system that is broad enough where it's, where it will encompass even a fast movement, but tight enough where it's not going to, you're not going to mix up different things. And then we end up going with the developers problem.
Developers.
How can we, and how can all of us, make this technology be the future? The simple solution is to get us all doing it. We have to think differently, like I mentioned before. We have to actually think with the motion control in mind.
Yeah, the developers are the ones that are going to drive this future. It's up to us. The future won't happen without us because, you can have tools, you can have hammers and screwdrivers made of gold, but if there's no craftsmen to use them, they're just going to sit there and feel like dust and be a novelty. So, with all that said, we have a proposal for you. This is our idea. We think that it would be a good idea for developers that are working with motion control, not just to develop for it, but to try developing with it. So instead of sitting at your computer, you've got your editor open, you've got your tool set, say you're a level designer, you're sculpting terrain, you're building assets, you're buildings, bridges, etc., etc. Imagine instead of you got your keyboard and mouse, and then okay, I want to play test the game, I want to debug now. So you gotta get up, you gotta plug it, you gotta get your motion controller, you gotta switch, and you gotta rewire your brain. Your brain's thinking differently, and you're constantly switching like that. We propose that it would actually be more intuitive and maybe even more efficient someday if you can integrate the motion control with the tools as well, so that you as a developer are also using these motion controls to sculpt terrain, to do all these tasks you're doing, to sculpt terrain, scale things, stretch them, do whatever it is you do. I think eventually, if more developers adapt this methodology, then we'll be seeing games, motion control games that are not only more intuitive for the player, but more efficient for the developer as well. And this, you've got to be fearless when you're doing this. Let's face it, because this is scary. This is like getting, I'm sure you've all sat down in front of something brand new, and you really want to learn it, but then you realize all the work that's involved, and you realize that it's like new, and no one else has done it before, like we were saying before. And that's daunting, but you really gotta, if you want to do it, if you want to make a motion control game, then you gotta be able to press on. You gotta keep going. You gotta be willing to try new things. And most importantly, you gotta be willing to abandon old methodologies and conventions, because that's the next slide. Is it working? Oh, yeah. Abandon old conventions. This is something you have to be able to do. And it's hard enough to abandon old material. Like it's hard enough to abandon a mechanic or an asset that you really loved and got an attachment to, and then it gets caught to the game, something like that. That's hard. But this is even harder, to ditch the methodologies that you've been using, the conventions, the way you've been going about things, because you're working with something that's completely different now, and has totally new capabilities. Persevere. That's pretty much, I guess that goes with be fearless, but you gotta keep on going, because otherwise you'll never, it's really easy to give up, honestly. And this is important too. It's about the feel of the game. Above all else, that's what's important. As a matter of fact, I think we have Steve Soon in the audience here. He wrote a really awesome book on game feel. You guys should read it. Yes, I just plugged you, Steve. awesome book. But he's right though. He went into a lot of great depth about that kind of stuff, because even before motion control, it's really what matters most is the connection between the player and what they see on the screen. If you can build a really strong connection there, then you've really got something. And with motion control, there's even more possibilities to make that connection stronger.